here. It is a beautiful Tuesday. Hope you got to go outside yesterday and enjoy the nice weather. If not, hopefully you get to go outside today because I went for a walk this morning and it is gorgeous outside. So today we're going to dive into chapter 7. And of course, like usual, I'll have a question for you to answer at the end in the comments. And hopefully we can have a discussion about that. So yeah, we're at chapter 7. Luke's mom just got a job. Things are starting to change for Luke a little bit. He didn't have it rough before. He definitely seems to be having it rougher. So let's get into chapter 7. And remember, we're reading Among the Hidden. And this is a series. So hopefully that if you really like this book, you can kind of go on with the series and read it on your own for enjoyment. And it's by Margaret Peterson Haddix. Okay, chapter 7. By mid-September, Luke's days had fallen into a familiar pattern. He got up at dawn just for the chance to sit on the stairs and watch the rest of his family eat breakfast. They all rushed now. Mother had to be at the factory by 7. Dad was trying to get all the machinery in working order before harvest. And Matthew and Mark were back to school. Only Luke had time to linger over his undercooked bacon and dry toast. He didn't bother asking for butter because that meant someone would have to stand up and bring it over to him, all the while pretending for the sake of the open window that they'd just forgotten something upstairs. As soon as the rest of his family had stomped out the door, Luke went back to his room and watched out the vents. First out the front to see Matthew and Mark climb onto the school bus, then out the back, where he knew the houses were practically finished. They were mansions, as large as the Garners' house and barn put together. They gleamed in the morning sunlight as though their walls were studded with precious jewels. For all Luke knew, maybe they were. Hordes of workers still arrived every morning, but almost all of them had worked indoors now. They headed into the houses first thing, carrying rolls of carpet, stacks of drywall, cans of paint. Luke couldn't see much of them after that. He spent more time watching a new kind of traffic, expensive-looking cars driving slowly down the newly paved streets. Sometimes they pulled into the driveway and went into one of the houses, usually trailing a woman who appeared to be talking nonstop. It had taken Luke a while to figure it out. He certainly hadn't dared to ask anyone else in his family. But he thought maybe the people were thinking about buying the houses. Once he had realized that, he studied each potential neighbor carefully. He'd overheard Mother and Dad marveling that the people moving into the new houses were not just going to be city people, but barons. Barons were unbelievably rich. Luke knew. They had things ordinary people hadn't had in years. Luke wasn't sure about how barons had gotten so rich. Everybody else was poor. But Dad never said the word baron without a curse word or two in front of it. The people streaming through the house did look different from anyone in Luke's family. They were mostly thin, beautiful women in form-fitting dresses, and heavy-set men in what Luke's dad and brothers called sissy clothes. Shiny shoes and clean dress pants and jackets. Luke always felt a little embarrassed for them showing up like that. Or maybe he was just embarrassed for his family that they never looked like any of the barons. Luke preferred it when adults had children with them. He could concentrate on them. The smallest ones were always dressed up as their parents, with hair bows and suspenders and other gewgaws. Luke knew his parents would never buy. The older kids usually seemed to be wearing whatever they grabbed first out of their closet that morning. Though he knew no one ever would dare to show up with 3 kids, he always counted. 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. What if a family with just 1 kid moved behind them and he sneaked into their house and pretended to be their second child? He could go to school, go to town, act like Matthew and Mark. What a joke. Luke living with barons, more likely he'd get shot for trespassing or be turned in. When he began thinking things like that, he always jumped down from his perch by the vent and grabbed a book from one of the dusty stacks by the eaves. Mother had taught him to read, do math, as much as she knew herself. At least we have a few books for you, she often mumbled sadly when she left in the morning. He had read all their books dozens of times. Even if the ones with the titles like Disease of the Porcupine Species and Common Grasses of Our Countryside. His favorites were the handful of adventure books, the ones that let him pretend that he was a knight fighting a dragon to rescue and kidnapped a princess. Or an explorer sailing on high seas, holding tight to the mast while a hurricane raged about. He liked to forget he was Luke Gardner, third child hiding in the attic. Sometime around noon, he'd hear the door from the mudroom to the kitchen swing open and he'd go down and eat at the same time as his dad. Without Mother there, no homemade pies now, no mashed potatoes, no roasts that sent good smells throughout the house. Dad always made 4 sandwiches, checked to make sure no one could see him, then handed 2 of them to Luke in the stairwell. Dad never talked. He'd explained that he didn't want anyone overhearing him and wondering, but he did turn the radio on for the noon farm report. And there were usually a song or 2 after that. Dad silenced the radio and went outside to work again. When Dad left, Luke went back to his room to read and watch the houses again. At 6:30, Mother came home, and she always stopped in and said hi to Luke before rushing out to do a whole day's work in a few hours before bedtime. Usually Matthew and Mark came up to visit him too, but they could never stay long either. They had to help Dad before supper, then do homework afterwards, and they always had been nicest to Luke outdoors. Before the woods came down, the 3 of them often had played kickball or football or spud in the backyard after school and chores. Matthew and Mark always fought about who got to have Luke on their team, because even if Luke wasn't very good, 2 boys together could always beat the 3rd. Now they played half-hearted games of cards or checkers with Luke, but Luke could tell they'd rather be outside. So would he. He tried not to think about it. The best part of the day came at the end, when Mother tucked him in. She'd be relaxed then. She'd stay for an hour sometimes, asking him what he had read that day or telling him stories about the factory. Then one night, when she was telling how her plastic glove had gotten stuck in a chicken she'd degutted that day, Mother suddenly stopped in the middle of a sentence. "Mother?" Luke said. She answered with a snore. She'd fallen asleep sitting up. Luke studied her face, seeing the lines of fatigue that hadn't been there before, noticing that her hair around her face now held as much gray as brown. "Mother," he said again, gently shaking her arm. She jerked. "But I cleaned that chicken all—" "Oh, sorry." "Luke, you need tucking in, don't you?" She fluffed his pillow, smoothed his sheet. Luke sat up. "That's okay, Mother. I'm getting too old for this anyway." He swallowed a lump in his throat. "Anyway, I bet you weren't still tucking Matthew or Mark in when they were 12. "No," she said quietly. "Then I don't need it either." "Okay," she said. She kissed his forehead anyhow, then turned out the light. Luke turned his face to the wall until she left. And that is the end of chapter 7. So, also in the comments, if you have any questions about maybe like what I read, or you're not sure, you're confused, or if there's something else like you want to add to the discussion, please feel free to write that in there. Okay, it doesn't have to be you just answering the question I pose. You can also ask me questions or give any kind of predictions of what you think is going to happen. I would love to see all of that in the discussion. So today, my question that I'm posing to you is, how do you think Luke is feeling at the end of this chapter? I feel like there's some feeling there with Mom. So how do you think he's feeling at the end of the chapter? And how do you know? And why do you think he's feeling this way? So provide some evidence of how you think he's feeling and why you think he's feeling that, and make sure you're providing evidence to support your answer. All right, boys and girls, I hope you have a very happy Tuesday, and I will see you tomorrow.